Now, in the last few minutes, Labour has unveiled a website called the Cost of Chaos Bill, where they highlight the cost to the taxpayer of what they're calling Tory chaos. Now, Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, joins us now live from Westminster. Good morning, Pat. Now, is this information you've published only one step above point scoring?
No, we've been very, if you pardon the pun, small c conservative with what we've published this morning. We could have added lots of other costs that aren't there, but we've been quite cautious in the way that we've done this. And the point that we're making is that all these changes of Prime Minister, changes of Chancellor, 60 ministerial resignations, all this faction fighting and changes of policy has had a material cost to the country, to the taxpayer, to mortgage payers. It adds up to billions of pounds, and it won't stop because they never stop. They're already manoeuvring around Rishi Sunak now. The leadership candidates are already plotting. And if the Tories were to win the next election, this kind of thing and this cost would all simply carry on.
And Pat, can you just give us a brief breakdown of some of the top points that you're making with this Cost of Chaos website and what it includes?
Well, for example, the Liz Truss mini-budget put rocket boosters under mortgage rates. That's costing families an average of £240 a month. It's about £4 billion in total on mortgage costs. Cancelling HS2 cost over £1 billion. Not having a general election in May when they should have had one cost £30 million because we could have capitalised on the fact that the same returning officers are organising local elections on the 2nd of May. We have to double that work now because they're going to have to do it later in the year. There are small items like severance payments paid by the taxpayer to the 60-odd ministers who've resigned in various Tory faction fights. And there's another important point here. The cost is not just financial, it's a cost in time. Time is such a precious thing when you're in government. And every day that's spent on reshuffles or leadership challenges or plotting is a day not spent on working for the public on their priorities. So it's a financial cost, but it's also a massive distraction too when people want the government to be working for them, not plotting against one another all the time.
So, Pat, will you yourself commit to a similar cost review if your party comes into power after the next general election? And will you also commit to holding your next general election at the same time as local elections to save money?
What I will commit to is trying to get some stability back into politics. I think stability is hugely underpriced. And when I speak to international investors, they say that the instability in the UK makes them ask a question about whether they want to make the investment, whether they want to come to the country. Now, some people say that we're not as exciting as we should be. And what I'm saying is that maybe excitement is overpriced in politics and maybe stability is underpriced. So that in itself would be a good change for British government.
So, Pat, speaking of instability, there's been quite a lot of it within the Labour Party over the past few months, hasn't there, with regards to its stance on Gaza. The reports of the Labour Party losing the Muslim vote over Keir Starmer's stance on Gaza. Should the Labour Party be concerned about that? And I'm not just talking about the Muslim vote, but the vote of anybody who wants to see an end to the war in Gaza.
Look, I understand why people have got strong feelings about this. After all, the human death toll has been enormous, and you were carrying a report a few minutes ago about a British aid worker who has been killed in Gaza. So I understand why people have strong feelings about this. And all the way through, we've said three things have to happen. One is the return of the hostages who were seized on October the 7th, some of whom are still being held. Secondly, a stop to the fighting, which has killed so many innocent Palestinians, and a permanent stop, not just a temporary pause, a sustainable stop to this. And thirdly, and crucially, rebuilding a better future for the Palestinians, because Palestinians were living in very difficult circumstances before Hamas launched these attacks on October the 7th. They're now living in absolutely terrible circumstances. So we have to have a better future for the Palestinians. And those are the three things that have driven our approach since this all began about 6 months ago.
Pat, what would you say to people who have already turned their back on the Labour Party with regards to their stance on Gaza? What are you saying to those people in the run-up to the general election to say you actually can trust us in regards to humanitarian crises and accusations of genocide?
Well, I think if we were to be elected at the next election, I know that Keir Starmer, if he was the Prime Minister, would be putting his weight, if the situation was as it is today, behind those three things. And they're all really important. The return of the hostages, a stop to the fighting, and a better future for the Palestinians. And that would be the priority for him and for the Labour Party if we were to be elected whenever that general election comes.
And Pat, if Israel are found to have broken humanitarian law, would Sir Keir Starmer, if he was leader, immediately cease the sale of all arms to Israel?
Well, we've always said throughout this that international humanitarian law must be observed. If the government has any legal advice to suggest that's not the case, they should come out and say so. This is absolutely crucial. I mean, I understand why Israel and the Israeli people would be so angry after what happened on October the 7th, but any response to that attack should be in line with international humanitarian law, and that's something that we've also said throughout the past 6 months.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning and giving us your time. Pat McFadden there, Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.